Of 1956, Lucia Baranovsky was head and over heels in love with a handsome young journalist, Victor Graevsky. लुसिया जो थी एक लड़की थी, वो विक्टर ग्रेव्सकी किसी लड़के से प्यार करती थी.
कैसे? हाँ, चल ठीक.
Her marriage to the deputy prime minister of communist Poland was on rocks and they hardly saw each other anymore. तो वो deputy prime minister of Poland की वो थी. Lucia worked as a secretary to Edward Oakshab, Secretary General of the Polish Communist Party. The members of his staff had grown accustomed to Victor's frequent visits to his girlfriend. There were no secret about Lucia's feelings for this dashing young man. ठीक है, लुसिया जो थी उस आदमी को बहुत पसंद करती थी. Victor was a senior editor at the Polish news agency PAP, in charge of Soviet and East European affairs. तो विक्टर जो था वो सोवियत एंड अदर अफेयर्स को वो देखता था. ये था. He was actually Jewish and his real name was Victor Spillman. ठीक है ना. But years ago, when he had joined the Communist Party, his friends had let him know that a name like Spillman, he won't get very far. So he changed it to Graevsky, which sounded Polish. तो उसने Spillman की जगह Graevsky कर दिया और जो कि Polish में था. When the German army invaded Poland in World War II, Victor was a child. His family had managed to cross into Russia and narrowly escaped the Holocaust. After the war, they came back to Poland. In 1949, Victor's parents and younger sister emigrated to Israel. But he was a staunch and ardent communist, stayed behind. An admirer of Stalin, he longed to help create a workers' paradise. तो विक्टर जो था वो वर्कर्स पैराडाइज क्रिएट करने के लिए वो रह गया और बाकी जो उसकी सिस्टर वगैरह थे वो लोग इजराइल चले गए. But neither Victor's friends nor colleagues nor even his beloved knew that disenchantment had started growing at the young communist's heart. ठीक है ना. In 1955, he visited his family in Israel and saw another world, free, progressive, a Jewish democratic nation, a dream of sorts utterly different from the communist propaganda he had been exposed to. The Victor अपने सिस्टर के पास कम्युनिस्ट उसमें गया और देखा कि यार ये तो दूसरी दुनिया है. Back in Poland, 30-year-old Victor began to consider emigrating to Israel. That morning in April 1956, Victor came as usual to visit his sweetheart at the party secretary's office. On a corner of a desk, he saw a brochure bound in red cover, numbered and stamped with the inscription Top Secret. What's this? He asked her. Oh, that's just Khrushchev's speech, she answered casually. उसने कहा कि कोई Khrushchev की स्पीच है.
लड़की कहाँ पे थी?
लड़की वहीं पे थी ना उसके साथ वो Victor Freud. He had heard about Khrushchev's speech but had never met anybody who had heard or read a single sentence from it. It was one of the best kept secrets of the communist box. तो Khrushchev की जो speech थी best kept secret थी. Victor did know that Nikita Khrushchev, the almighty general secretary of the Soviet Communist Party, had delivered the speech at the party's 20th Congress, which had taken place the previous February at Kremlin. On February 25, shortly before midnight, all foreign guests and heads of foreign communist parties were asked to leave the hall. At midnight, Khrushchev took the podium and spoke to 1400 Soviet delegates. तो Khrushchev ने 1400 Soviet delegates को कुछ speech दी थी. His speech was said to be a surprise and a terrible shock for everyone present. But what he had said? According to an American journalist who dispatched the first report to the West, the speech had lasted for 4 hours. 4 घंटे तक चली थी. And Khrushchev had described in detail the terrible crimes of the man worshipped by millions of communists all over the world, Stalin. तो क्रुश्चेव ने बहुत डिटेल में बताया था जो स्टालिन के क्राइम्स थे.
किसने?
क्रुश्चेव ने एक स्पीच में.
अच्छा.
Khrushchev, rumor had it, had accused Stalin of massacre of millions. Some whispered that while listening to the speech, many delegates cried and pulled out their hair in despair.
क्या?
मतलब ऐसा हुआ था, क्रुश्चेव ने एक ऐसी स्पीच दी थी जो कि जिसमें कि उसने कहा था कि स्टालिन ने बहुत पाप किए हैं।
कितने?
स्टालिन ने,
हाँ।
लोग जो थे वहाँ पे जो बैठे हुए थे ना, वो लोग एकदम रो पड़े थे, यू नो दिस थिंग। सम फेंटेड और सफर्ड हार्ट अटैक्स। एटलीस्ट 2 कमिटेड सुसाइड आफ्टर दैट नाइट। 2 लोगों ने सुसाइड कमिट कर लिया था आफ्टर दैट नाइट। But not a word about Khrushchev's revelations were published by the Soviet media. Rumors circulated through Moscow and some passages of the speech were read in closed sessions of the party's supreme bodies. But the full text of the speech was guarded as if it were a state secret. Foreign reporters had told Victor that the Western secret services were mounting an all out effort to obtain the text. The CIA had even offered $1 million reward. It was estimated that the publication of text at the height of the Cold War between the West and the Soviet bloc could generate a political earthquake in the communist countries. मतलब अगर वो स्पीच बाहर आ जाए तो कम्युनिस्ट कंट्रीज में भूचाल आ जाएगा, बेसिकली ये था, राइट, and trigger an unprecedented crisis. Hundreds of millions of communists inside and outside Russia blindly worshipped Stalin. The exposure of his crimes could destroy their faith and perhaps even cause the collapse of the Soviet Union. But all the efforts to get the speech failed. It remained an enigma. वो speech क्या थी वो किसी को नहीं पता लगी. It was just an enigma. Lately, Victor had learned that Khrushchev had decided to send a few numbered copies to Communist Party leaders in Eastern Europe, which is how that brochure bound in red had reached Lucia's desk. तो लुसिया जो थी थोड़ी बेवकूफ़ थी, तो उसके डेस्क पे वो जो स्पीच जो थी, जो क्रुश्चेव वाली थी, वो पड़ी हुई थी. When Victor Graevsky spotted the speech, he had a crazy idea. He asked Lucia to lend it to him for a couple of hours so he could read it at home, away from the hustle bustle of this office. तो उसने लुसिया से कहा, देखो मेरे को स्पीच दे दो, मैं इसको जो है हसल बसल ऑफ द ऑफिस से दूर पहनूंगा. To his surprise, she agreed. She was eager to please him. You can take it, she said, but you must bring it back before 4 p.m. I have to lock it in the safe. 4 बजे के पहले जो है उस स्पीच को वापस लाना, क्योंकि मुझे उसको सेफ में डालना है. At home, Victor read the speech. It was indeed stunning. Khrushchev had shattered boldly and mercilessly the myth of Yosef Vissarionovich Stalin. तो क्रुश्चेव ने स्टालिन की जो थी वो पूरी की पूरी उधेड़ दी थी. Khrushchev revealed that Stalin, during his years in power, had committed monstrous crimes and ordered the murder of millions. He had reminded his audience that Lenin, the father of the Bolshevik Revolution, had warned the party against Stalin. तो लेनिन ने एक्चुअली स्टालिन के खिलाफ जो था ये वॉर्न किया था कि बहुत रूथलेस है. Khrushchev condemned the cult of personality surrounding the man who had been hailed as the son of the nations. He told of the forced relocation of the entire ethnic groups in the Soviet Union, which led to countless deaths. Right. Of the Great Purges 1936 to 1937, when 1 million communists were arrested and 680,000 of them executed. Out of the 1,966 delegates to the 17th Congress of the party on Stalin's orders, 848 were executed, as well as 98 out of 138 candidates to the Central Committee. तो बहुत ruthlessly जो था वो exterminate कर रहा था, किल किया था. Khrushchev also spoke of the doctors' plot, the fabricated accusations against doctors who allegedly had conspired to murder Stalin and other Soviet leaders. Khrushchev's word revealed Stalin as a mass murderer. तो क्रुश्चेव के वर्ड के हिसाब से तो स्टालिन एक मास मर्डरर who had massacred millions of Russians and other nationals, many of them loyal communists. In 4 hours, the Messiah had metamorphosized into a monster. Khrushchev's speech shredded Victor's last illusions about communism. अब जब क्रुश्चेव की स्पीच पढ़ी तो विक्टर के जो लास्ट illusions about communism थे वो खत्म हो गए. And he realized that he held in his hand an explosive device that could shake the Soviet camp to its foundations. He decided to return the red brochure to Lucia, But on his way to her, he had second thoughts, and his feet carried him elsewhere to the Israeli embassy. अब क्या हुआ कि वो जा रहा था, पर वो सडनली वो इजरायली एम्बेसी चला गया. उसने कहा बेटा इजरायली एम्बेसी में जा करके एक बार दिखाया जाए. He walked in confidently, and the wall of the Polish policeman and the service secret servant agents parted and let him pass. A few minutes later, he was in the office of Yakov Barmore, officially a first secretary of the embassy. But in reality, the Shabak representative in Poland. तो जो बंदा था जिसके उसमें गया वो शबाक मतलब वो जो इजरायली सीक्रेट एजेंसी का वो था रिप्रेजेंटेटिव. Kreisky handed him the red brochure. The Israeli perused it and his jaw dropped. Will you wait a few minutes? कुछ मिनट्स वेट करोगे? He asked. Grabbed the brochure and left the room. उसने ब्रोशर को लिया और रूम में चला गया. He came an hour later. Kreisky realized that Barmore had photocopied it. ठीक है ना? But asked no questions. He picked it up, concealed it under his coat, and left. He reached Lucio's office on time and put it in the safe. ग्रेव्सकी ने फटाफट उठाया, फिर वो फोटोकॉपी जो इजरायली था उसने की और फिर वो वापस जो था लेकर के चला गया. Nobody bothered him or asked him about his impromptu visit to the Israeli embassy. किसी ने पूछा ही नहीं कि भाई तुम इजरायली एम्बेसी क्यों गए थे. On Friday, April 13, 1956, in the early afternoon, Zelig Katz entered the office of the director of Shabak, Amos Manor. Katz was Manor's personal assistant. Shabak headquarters were located in the old Arab building in Jaffa, not far from the flea market. तो शबाक का जो हेडक्वार्टर्स था ना वो अरब बिल्डिंग के पास था, मैं मार्केट के पहुंचा था.
शबाक क्या चीज़ है?
शबाक मामा इसराइल की बिफोर मोसाद उनकी वो थी इंटेलिजेंस एजेंसी. अभी मोसाद शायद बाद में बनी है. Manor asked cast a routine Friday questions. Any material from Eastern Europe? Friday was the day when the diplomatic pouch brought reports from Shabak agents behind the iron curtain. ठीक है, फ्राइडे को वो रिपोर्ट करते थे. Zelig nonchalantly quipped that a few minutes ago he had received from Warsaw some speech of the Khruschev at the Congress. Manor jumped from his seat. What, he wrote? Bring it at once. उसने कहा bring it at once. Manor had emigrated to Israel only a few years earlier. Born Arthur Mendelovich in Romania, to a well-to-do family, he was sent to Auschwitz, है ना? Where his entire family, parents, sister, and two brothers were murdered. He survived weighing barely 80 pounds when the camp was liberated. Back in Bucharest, he worked for Ali Abed, helping smuggle Jewish refugees into British-controlled Palestine. मतलब क्या हुआ कि ये बंदा जो था जो वहाँ पे बैठा हुआ था वो ऑशविट्स गया था, तो उसकी फैमिली मार दी थी, तो ये बच के आ गया था, केवल 40 पाउंड्स का था. जब ये वापस आया तो फिर इसने जो था रोमेनिया में जा कर के अपने जो बुखारेस्ट में सारे लोग जो थे जूस को पैलेस्टाइन भेजना शुरू कर दिया. He used the war name of Amos and several other names to cover his tracks. When his turn came to leave for Israel in 1945, the Romanian authorities won't let him go. He managed to escape with a forged Czech passport in the name of Otto Stanek. तो उसने क्या किया, अपना एक फोर्ज किया पासपोर्ट और रोमेनिया से भागा क्योंकि रोमेनियन अथॉरिटीज उसको जाने नहीं दे रहे थे. His friends started calling him the man with 1,000 names. In Israel, he became Amos Manor. उसका नाम हो गया Amos Manor. He rose quickly in the secret services. Isser was fascinated by him. Manor was his opposite. Isser small, Manor tall. Isser tough and gruff, Manor suave and urban. Isser played no sport, while Manor was a swimmer and played soccer, tennis, right? Volleyball. Isser spoke Russian and Yiddish. Manor spoke 7 languages. Isser was a devoted Labour Party member. Manor didn't care about politics. ये दोनों अलग एकदम अलग अलग थे.
कौन है, नाम क्या है?
Isser और Manor.
वो लड़की थी?
नहीं अम्मा, क्या हुआ था कि ये जो मैनर है ये इसके बारे में बता रहा है ना, ठीक है ना। और
और दूसरा आदमी कौन है?
इसे
हाँ ठीक है, चलो आगे चलो।
but beside all that he was intelligent and resourceful. Essays recruited him to Shabak in 1949. मतलब इसे इनका कोई टॉप मोस्ट बंदा था, ठीक है ना। और ये जो था ये था barely 4 years later he was appointed director by Ben Gurion on Isser's recommendation. He was also put in charge of the Israeli intelligence community's secret relations with the CIA. ठीक है, तो उसको एक टॉप मोस्ट पोजीशन पे डाल दिया इसेर ने, इसे जिसने शबाक शायद बनाई होगी. On that rainy Friday, Manna threw himself into the sheaf of photocopied papers. He had no problems understanding it. One of his 7 languages was Russian. Reading the pages, he realized the huge importance of Khrushchev's speech. He jumped into his car, rushed to Ben Gurion's house. You must read this, he told the Prime Minister. Ben Gurion, who also knew Russian, read the speech. The following morning, a Shabbat, he summoned Manner urgently. This is a historic document, he said, and it all but proves that in the future, Russia will become a democratic nation. आगे फ्यूचर में रशिया एक डेमोक्रेटिक नेशन बनेगा, ये बेन गुरियन ने कहा. ठीक है, चलो. Acer got the speech on April 15 and right away saw it could be a bonanza for Israel. And it was the means to upgrade Mossad's ties with CIA, first established in 1947. अब इजर बड़ा चतुर, उसने कहा कि मोज़ाद की टाइज को सीआईए से कैसे बड़ा स्पीड से किया जाए. In 1951, when visiting the United States, उन्होंने immediately नहीं किया. Ben Gurion had called on General Walter Bedell Smith, whom he had met in Europe at the end of World War II. Bedell Smith was the director of the CIA and about to be replaced by Allen Dulles, an OSS brother. Right? Veteran and the brother of future Secretary of State. Bedell Smith agreed hesitantly to establish limited cooperation between CIA and Mossad. तो बेथल ने कहा था एक लिमिटेड कॉपरेशन रखते हैं CIA और मोसाद के, पर मोसाद was not very important in the CIA scheme of things. The main element of such cooperation was the debriefing by Israelis of Soviet and Eastern Bloc immigrants. मतलब अमेरिकन ने इसलिए रखा था क्योंकि वो जो सोवियत और ईस्ट यूरोपियन जो इमिग्रेंट्स आते हैं उसकी नॉलेज इजरायली एजेंसी को होगी, तो वो अमेरिकन को बताएगा. Many were engineers, technicians, and even army officers who had worked in Soviet or Warsaw Pact installations and were able to supply detailed information about the capacity of the communist bloc's armies. This information was regularly conveyed and it impressed the Americans. तो जूस ने वो इज़राइल ने वो इन्फॉर्मेशन दी और अमेरिकन्स को वो देते रहे थे और वो उससे काफ़ी इम्प्रेस हो गए थे अमेरिकन्स. The CIA appointed as liaison with Israel was a legendary figure, James Jesus Angleton, the head of CIA counterintelligence. Angleton visited Israel and came to know the heads of its services. He established a friendly rapport with Amos Manor and even spent a few nights in his tiny two-room apartment drinking bottles of scotch. But this time, Esar and Amos offered far more than immigrants' briefings. They decided to hand over Khrushchev's speech to the Americans, not via the CIA man in Tel Aviv, but directly in Washington. तो इजरायलीज ने वॉशिंगटन में डायरेक्टली वो क्रुश्चेव की स्पीच जो थी वो दे दी. Manna dispatched a copy of the speech with a special courier to Dorot, the Mossad representative in the United States. तो मोज़ाद का रिप्रेजेंटेटिव जो था इजी दरौत, उसको जो थी स्पीच कुरियर की गई, who rushed to Washington and handed it to Angleton. On April 17, Angleton brought the speech to Allen Dulles, and later that day it was on President Eisenhower's desk. American intelligence experts were stunned. Israel's tiny spy services had obtained what the giant, sophisticated services of the United States, Britain, and France couldn't. अमेरिकन की इंटेलिजेंस एजेंसी तो धक्के में आ गई कि इजराइल ने कैसे पता लगा ली वो स्पीच में क्या और हमसे नहीं पता लगा. Skeptical, the CIA senior staff had the document examined by experts who unanimously concluded it was genuine. तो सारे एक्सपर्ट्स से सीआईए वालों ने चेक करा, भैया ये डॉक्यूमेंट जेन्युइन है? बोले हाँ, ये तो जेन्युइन है. Based on that, the CIA leaked it to the New York Times. ठीक है ना? Which published it on its front page on June 5th, 1956. Its publication caused an earthquake of sorts in the communist world. तो न्यूयॉर्क टाइम्स ने उसको पब्लिश किया और कम्युनिस्ट वर्ल्ड में भूचाल आ गया and prompted millions to turn their backs to the Soviet Union. Some historians hold that spontaneous uprisings against Soviets in Poland and Hungary in the fall of 1956 were motivated by Khrushchev's revelations. तो पोलैंड और उसमें जो हंगरी में जो अपराइजिंग्स हुई थी 1956 में, वो एक्चुअली क्रुश्चेव की रेवलेशंस के कारण हुई थी. The intelligence coup led to a major breakthrough in Mossad's relations with its American counterpart, and the modest brochure that Lucia had shown to Victor endowed the Israeli Mossad with an intelligence aura. Back in Warsaw, no one suspected Viktor Gruevski of having smuggled Khrushchev's speech to the United States. अब पोलैंड में किसी ने सस्पेक्ट ही नहीं किया कि भैया ये जो स्पीच है ये विक्टर साहब ने की है, ग्रेविस्की ने. In January 1957, Victor emigrated to Israel. Grateful, Amos Monor helped him get a job in the East European department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Shortly afterwards, he was also hired as an editor and reporter in the Polish section of Koil Israel, the state-owned radio news network. But soon he also got a third job. Shortly after coming to Israel, he met a few Soviet diplomats at an Alpan, a special school where immigrants and foreigners were taught the Hebrew language. तो इमिग्रेंट्स और फॉरेनर्स को हेब्रू लैंग्वेज सिखाई जाती थी. तो अल्पन में जाकर के कुछ सोवियत डिप्लोमेट्स उसकी दोस्ती हुई. One of the Russian diplomats happened to meet him in a foreign ministry's hallway and was impressed by the important position held by this new immigrant. Soon afterwards, a KGB agent popped up by chance at Gruevski's side on Tel Aviv street. तो ग्रेव्सकी ने वो किया था, तो एक KGB एजेंट आया. He conversed with Gruevski and reminded him of his past in Poland as an anti-Nazi and a communist. उसने बात की और बोला भैया पोलैंड में तुम्हारा जो पास्ट है वो एंटी नाजी और कम्युनिस्ट थे. Then he made him an offer. Become a KGB agent in Israel. Gruevski promised to think about it and then made a beeline for Mossad headquarters. What should I do? He asked. मुझे करना क्या है? The Mossad people were delighted. Wonderful, they said. Go ahead and accept कर दो. They would turn Gruevski into a double agent who would feed the Russians false information. तो ग्रेविस्की एक डबल एजेंट बन जाएगा जो कि रशियंस को फॉल्स इंफॉर्मेशन जो है वो देता रहेगा. ठीक है. So began a new lengthy career for Victor. For many years he supplied the Russians with information concocted and doctored by Mossad. His KGB handlers would meet him in the forests around Jerusalem and Ramleh, in Russian churches and monasteries in Jaffa, Jerusalem and Tiberias, during chance encounters in crowded restaurants and at diplomatic receptions. Not once in the 14 years that Gruevski spent as a double agent did the Soviets suspect that he was the one using them. सोवियट्स को पता ही नहीं लगा कि ग्रेविस्की एक डबल एजेंट है, उनको बेवकूफ़ बना रहा है ना, उनसे इंफॉर्मेशन ले रहा है और गलत इंफॉर्मेशन है. They complimented over and over for the excellent materials he had provided. In KGB headquarters in Moscow, rumor had it that the Soviet Union had an agent embedded deep in the Israeli governing circles. Through all those years, the Soviets trusted Gruevski and never questioned his credibility. The exception was in 1967 when they ignored him and his conclusions. Ironically, this was the only time when he delivered fully accurate information. 1967 में जब लड़ाई हुई थी तो उसने बताया था कि अटैक होने वाला है, तो सोवियट्स ने इग्नोर कर दिया था, तभी उसने सबसे सही इंफॉर्मेशन बताई थी. During the waiting period in 1967 before the Six-Day War, Egypt's president Gamal Abdel Nasser earnestly believed that Israel intended to attack Syria in May. So he massed his troops in Sinai, expelled the UN peacekeepers, closed the Red Sea straits to Israeli ships, and threatened Israel with annihilation. Israel had no intention to attack and was eager to prevent a war with Egypt. इसराइल का कोई इंटेंशन नहीं था अटैक करने का और वो इजिप्ट से लड़ना नहीं चाह रहा था. Prime Minister Eshkol asked Mozart to inform the Soviets that if Egypt didn't cancel its aggressive measures, Israel will have to go to war. एशकॉल ने बोला बेटा अगर तुमने एग्रेसिव नहीं किया कम किया तो हमको लड़ाई करनी पड़ेगी. He hoped that the Soviet Union, which had huge influence on Egypt, would stop Nasser. Grevesky conveyed to the KGB a document detailing Israel's true intentions. But the USSR made a wrong assessment of the situation. Moscow ignored Grevesky's report and encouraged Nasser in his belligerence. तो क्रेवेस्की ने ये कहा था देखो कि इजराइल की तरफ से कि इजिप्ट पे अटैक मत करो, ठीक है ना, हम इजिप्ट पे अटैक नहीं करेंगे, पर अगर आपने इग्नोर किया हमें तो हम लड़ाई करेंगे. मॉस्को ने इग्नोर कर दिया तो नासिर साहब जो थे चढ़ते चले गए थे. The result was that Israel in a preemptive attack destroyed the armies of Egypt, Syria and Jordan and conquered much of their territory. The Soviet Union suffered too. Its weapons were proved inferior. It reneged on its promises and failed to support its badly beaten allies. और सबकी काफ़ी वो खिल्ली उड़ी. Nevertheless, the long-lasting affair between Grevesky and the KGB reached its peak that year. He was summoned to the meeting with a Soviet handler in a forest in central Israel. The KGB agent solemnly informed him that the Soviet government wanted to thank him for his devoted services and had decided to award him its highest distinction, the Lenin Medal. तो सोवियत यूनियन ने कहा था कि तुम्हें जो है हाईएस्ट डिस्टिंक्शन लेनिन मेडल देने वाले हैं हम लोग, और बहुत ही थैंकफुल थे. The Russians apologized for not being able to pin the medal on Grevesky's lapel in Israel, but assured him that the medal was being kept for him in Moscow and he would receive it whenever he got there. Grevesky preferred to stay in Israel. Grevesky ने कहा मैं तो इजराइल में रहूंगा. यहूदी बड़े चतुर होते हैं. And in 1971, he retired from the spy game. But he was not forgotten. In 2007, Grevesky was invited to Shabak headquarters, where he was welcomed by a select group that included present and past directors of Shabak and Mossad, as well as many of his friends, colleagues, and relatives. The Shabak director at the time, Yuval Diskin, presented him with the prestigious award for his distinguished service, and Grevesky became the only Mossad agent to be decorated twice by his own country, which he had served with devotion all his life, and by his country's foe, whom he had misled and deceived. Regardless of the risks. A reporter called him a man who began the end of the Soviet Empire. But Grevesky didn't feel that way. I'm not a hero and didn't make history, he said. The one who made history work was Khruschev. I just met history for a couple of hours and then our ways parted. He died at the age of 81 and somewhere in the Kremlin, in a little box padded with red velvet, his medal engraved with the profile of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, perhaps still awaits him. और ये कहानी खत्म. My God, Israeli